And we are live. We're live, Senator.
Yep. Good morning. This is Friday, May 10th, 2026. Oh, no, 2024. Just feels like 2026. I know we've all been looking forward to today being the day of adjournment, and that's always the question, and we don't know. But we're still dealing with bills, and so if Eric, you have some comments on the Judicial Nominating Board bill.
Yes, thank you, Senator Sears. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel. Just to let the committee know that H 780, which is the act relating to judicial nominations and appointments, I don't know that it's come. I think they were not able to suspend rules so that it didn't come back from the House last night like they thought it might. But just to give you guys a little preview of what the changes were, or change. There was only one change that the House made to that bill. You remember one thing that was added in the Senate, and it had to do with the fact that the membership on the Judicial Nominating Board was being increased by 1 from 11 to 12, and that 12th member was it was either the Executive Director of Racial Equity or the Executive Director's designee. And you added a legislative intent section to say that that person should be an employee of the agency administration with diversity, equity, and inclusion experience. So that so the only change that the House made to the Senate bill was to strike the legislative intent section. Their take on it was that the executive director should have the discretion to make the selection that he or she wanted to make, and that they would likely choose someone with the same experience that the director had. So I guess that was their take on it. And other than that, they kept no other changes to the Senate version. So just wanted to let you know, so you know in advance, given the timing, things are moving so quickly today, that way you have a preview of what the change is.
My only response is I believe we put the legislative intent in at the suggestion of the administration. And I believe it was during Jay Johnson's testimony that we felt that there was a wide enough group to meet the inclusion and inclusivity and et cetera, that we put in the intent within the agency of administration. And we were concerned about, I think we shared some of that concern. Now, I don't want to kill the bill over it, but it also might invite a veto. But that would be up to the House. I mean, we're at a late date in the session.
From what I can remember, I thought we added that in and then asked the administration what their thoughts were on it. But if I'm misremembering.
You may be correct. You may be correct. It may have been an email or something between myself and Jay. But at any rate.
Like the cost savings measure also, I mean, what was the intent behind it also?
Well, yeah, you wouldn't have to pay somebody who didn't work for the state. Right. And the Appropriations Committee was fairly strong about it.
Yep.
I mean, we can make a decision when it comes back. But
well, Director Davis still gets to make the appointment, right? We haven't taken that from her.
No. It's the issue of if she doesn't want to do it or wants to designate somebody, should she be restricted to state employees who work within the agency of administration?
Are there any rules around that in general? I imagine I just don't envision them assigning a designee who's, just completely disconnected from, everything in the state. Or I guess,
Right.
if they have full unilateral power, then I guess maybe they could, but.
Well, they would have as much power as any member of the Judicial Nominating Board. And with our new 3/4 requirement,
I thought it was fine. I don't see the change. I could, either way, whatever.
Yeah.
all right, well, we know that. So we're kind of ambivalent to the extent that we don't want to lose the bill. So, thank you, Eric. Ben,
Yeah, sure.
Ben, we've handed out, and I've gotten to look at the House changes to the Climate Superfund Recovery Bill. What is the title of the bill again?
Act relating to climate change.
Climate Superfund.
Cost Recovery Program.
Yes, there you go.
Cost recovery.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm supposed to be on radio right now.
So this document that Mike O'Grady sent over, it is a section by section summary, but anything in bold is a House change to the Senate bill.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Mike O'Grady is not coming in this morning. However, he did say that the changes were very minimal. And if we feel like we need to hear from him, I can see if I can get him in later. But
Is this from House Judiciary?
so
Yes.
yeah, but it originally went to Environment and Energy. Then it went to House Judiciary. And then I believe possibly appropriations, but neither two policy committees it went to was Environment and Energy and Judiciary.
I think all the changes are from the two policy committees.
Someone remind me what CPI stands for again?
Price index
No.
inflation.
Thank you.
For the record, and I really want to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Consumer price index, you said?
Yeah. I just emailed here.
Are we on track?
Yep, so they're just looking at some quick changes to the Climate Superfund, but we're good for you.
All right, should
Yeah.
you can do whatever you'd like. Mr. Novogroski. Hopefully we can finish this one.
Is that for 190? That is my handwriting. Thank you.
So,
Is that one someone else's?
Yep, I don't know, these got mixed up. That was the only one that had notes on it.
So where are we on is it okay to concur?
I'm good with it.
Sounds like we're turning into a business, but.
Yeah, well,
Rates and whatever else, I mean, yeah, I'm fine with it. What do you think about it, Secretary?
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
I think they did as little damage as they could possibly do. Which is a real compliment to them.
Just real briefly, I could ask either the witnesses that we have, Ben or Anthony, regarding the interest on installments rather than using inflation. Can you just provide a little bit more information on that, if either of you?
Yeah, so it's not an either or. The House amendment allows at the Secretary of the agency at his discretion, both adjustments for inflation for payments on the installment plan that the bill contemplates or other late payments, and the potential for interest. And my understanding is the rationale for that was there is a likely financial benefit to companies for paying over time. And so the interest payments would balance that out to some degree.
And interest payments in this context, is that standard in other situations where this type of system is created?
I mean, for the record, Anthony, I know with the Conservation Law Foundation. I think if you look at an analogy in our court system, like if you have a judgment, there's a standard statutory judgment interest rate, which is actually much higher than consumer price index interest. So it's consistent with that analogy, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, for the record, the statutory judgment interest is 12%.
And what is it for CPI?
It would be
It changes.
Inflation rate,
Yeah,
single digit something. We
Supposed to be maybe 2.5. It's not gonna be here in 10 minutes. No.
Nada, you're going to report this on the floor, correct?
Yes, happy to. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So let's are we live?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Ben, take it away.
All right, thank you, Senator Steers. For the record, Ben Novogroski from the Office of Legislative Counsel, picking up the walkthrough of S-195. I'm just gonna rely on the side-by-side because everything that the House Corrections Report, or that was contained in the House Corrections Report and Senate Judiciary Report was ultimately passed with a small floor amendment, which we already went through for home detention yesterday. One part I did not talk about in home detention is that there's also a like policy and procedures requirement. So DOC would develop policies and procedures to assist in the implementation of the program, assist the courts, assist any contractors with it. So there's that aspect as well. Moving on to section 4, this was the addition of the new sort of proceeding to hold for violations of conditions that was struck in the House after testimony from DSAS and others and the courts. It was really determined to revamp 7559, which is the contempt procedure for violations of conditions of release, rather than creating a new mechanism to enforce it that would essentially duplicate what 7559 did. So it was struck in the House version of the bill. Any questions on that portion?
Which page are you on?
They're not numbered.
Yeah, I tried to remember it.
Which section?
Section 4.
Okay.
I think it's on the 8th page. I got it. Yeah. So section 5 was the addition of the electronic monitoring program. What the House did is that they struck that provision and rolled electronic monitoring in as one of the supervision methods in the pretrial supervision program. So it's just one of the methods of supervision that can now be imposed through the pretrial supervision program, as opposed to a standalone condition that can be imposed. What was section 6 of the Senate version is now section 4 in the House version. This is the pretrial supervision program. There is no change other than statutorily it's now 7555 instead of 7554G. So I'm reviving a 50-year-old repealed statute just to kind of break things out a little bit. No change in subsection A. There was a change in subsection B, which is, if you turn to the next page, the definition of absconding, just a slight sort of grammatical change given the usage in it, and also a slight change to the cross-reference, a more specific one. Subdivisions B and C of the definition statute that it cross-references is more appropriate for this because subdivision A requires those that were either convicted of a listed crime or of a non-listed crime. Since we're talking about pre-adjudication, being convicted is not really sensible in this context. So it just essentially cross-references more specific things about fleeing from the department or fleeing the jurisdiction. So just a little bit more precise there. Moving on to the next row, there's now a start date of the pretrial supervision program of January 1st of next year to try and help with the funding issue that we've discussed. And then you'll see subsection G, there's an exception for that, and that is another sort of policy and procedure requirement. So essentially, once the bill passes, the department can start developing those policies and procedures to have ready to go when the program is implemented on January 1st. You also see that the process is a little bit more built out and specific as far as how it goes. Basically, what the House did is that they made an eligibility threshold for pretrial supervision, and then there's an appropriateness determination if you are eligible. So essentially what the House did was if you have not fewer than 5 pending dockets, or you are alleged to have violated conditions of release, you can be assessed to be placed into the pretrial supervision program. You'll see scrolling down at the bottom row of that page, just some terminology changes. We're now calling them pretrial supervision officers. That was due to sort of an HR issue that DOC identified. So just to be with that. And then again, you'll see that there are changes from the Senate version, but it's really to help outline sort of what the process is. And you'll see that electronic monitoring is rolled in as one of the supervision levels. So essentially this shores up the fact that it's the court orders placement and conditions in the program, and that you're using supervision levels, telephone monitoring, things that were standard as they left the Senate, but with the addition of electronic monitoring as one of the supervision levels that can be imposed by the court. Turning to the next page, you'll see here when placing the defendant in the program pursuant to subsection D, which outlines sort of the appropriateness determination, the court again issues the order that sets the supervision levels based on the recommendations of the Department of Corrections. So what was discussed in the House, and you'll see this later on in the statute, is that during sort of the eligibility and appropriateness determinations, the department will be ordered to essentially do an evidence-based screening and submit that report to the court for the court to use in making that assessment of appropriateness. So they can essentially rubber stamp that report, or they can deviate in its discretion, or in the court's discretion. But it's a way to sort of make the process a little bit more efficient for the court when imposing these conditions. You'll see in the next row that just some terminology changes, that this can occur at arraignment or at a subsequent hearing, and that the prosecutor or the defendant may move, or the court may do it on its own motion, that the defendant be reviewed for appropriateness in the program. And then you'll see later on that it will be scheduled upon receipt of the report from DOC recommending those supervision levels. And so those are the big changes there. Any questions on the sort of appropriateness determination and the report that's due? Okay, moving on to that bottom row, just some grammatical changes, but this is again sort of that appropriate, that eligibility threshold, just to really clarify that it's not fewer than 5 dockets or you've alleged to have violated conditions. And then we're on the next page now. Moving to the next row, you'll see again addition of the reference to the review of the report by DOC containing those supervision level recommendations. But basically the court does the assessment that it's to reasonably ensure protection of the public, mitigate risk of flight, or ensure appearance. That doesn't change from the Senate. And the court may consider the following, which is very similar to sort of the home detention, the nature of the violation of conditions released pursuant to section 7559, which is the VCR statute, which removed the cross-reference to that new proceeding, the nature and circumstances of the underlying offense, essentially the defendant's criminal record, and then any risk or undue burden to third parties or risk to public safety that may result from the placement, or any other factors that the court deems appropriate. So just a little bit more clarity and to align with the other changes that were made to the program. On the next row, you'll see here, this concerns potential violations of the program. So the pretrial supervisors still must notify the prosecutor and use reasonable efforts to notify the defendant of any violations of court conditions. But what the House added is that there are different administrative conditions that are imposed by the department that aren't court imposed conditions. So for instance, like if you're on electronic monitoring, keep the bracelet charged, things like that. But what this does is it accounts for, just life, for lack of a better term, that the pretrial supervision officers have discretion to notify the prosecutor and the defendant of those administrative violations. So they are required to notify of the violations of the court imposed conditions, but have discretion to notify those administrative conditions. And then again, the prosecutor sort of has discretion as to what to do with those reported violations. Essentially, again, that they have the ability, and this doesn't really change a whole lot, except they did get rid of the flash site. So if someone does violate, the prosecutor doesn't have the explicit authority to issue a flashlight, and that was due to testimony from both the courts and the prosecutors, just about creating more issues when it comes to the backlog, that they would then have to prioritize these cases at the expense of others. So theoretically, prosecutors and law enforcement agencies have the ability to do a flash site. It's just not explicitly required now. There's just a more general compliance section. So previously, as it left the Senate, there was sort of this contemplation that if someone's been compliant for 90 days or more, they could potentially have conditions lifted, or if there was a violation within that period, they could have a reassessment. Rather than explicitly outlining that, essentially the House just says that they can be reviewed for really any reason, good or bad, at the request
Ben,
of.
can I interrupt just for a second about the flash site?
Yeah.
I understand the prosecutors and the court's concern, and I wouldn't want to kill the bill over it. But to me, that was an important point. This is where the public is so upset, is that we don't put these cases of repeat violations in front of minor misdemeanors and other crimes. We tend to, excuse me, because they're minor misdemeanors, in some cases, we don't put them in front. And we have people with 46 violations. That, I think that was the idea behind it from the Senate's point of view, but.
Yeah, and, if I recall the testimony, and that is extremely valid and was a point of discussion, is that I think that the courts and the prosecutors felt that, we're already creating a subset of a population within the pretrial supervision program, those people that are either violating conditions or have, those 5 pending dockets against them. And so I think that the thought process on their part was, well, we're already kind of addressing that by putting those people that are violators into the program. And so they said to have the additional requirement of then flashlighting people that are under supervision the next day would just create a mandate that the court couldn't necessarily handle efficiently. But they did say that, there's still an option for prosecutors and law enforcement. It's just not a requirement. So I understand what you're saying, Senator Sears, but I think to paint the testimony objectively is that they felt that the process itself, as contemplated here, would help hedge against that issue. But again, it's really a policy call.
I'm satisfied with that answer, but I remain concerned that I guess those of anybody who's here next year can deal with it if we haven't solved the problem.
Senator Vogt,
195.
Yeah, Senator Sears, I absolutely take your point, and I think given that that the state's attorney still can do the flashlight for those instances like you're talking about, if there's 46 violations. For me, when I think about it, this is sort of like balancing all ends of the system, and if we increase the backlog by forcing those flashlights, we're going to create more violations on the other end because people are waiting longer. So this feels like it strikes a reasonable balance to me of being able to respond to the egregious cases, but not actually making the problem worse on the other end by increasing the backlog.
Okay.
And to that point as well, I mean, if somebody is really dangerous and can't be found or whatever, this statute does contemplate issuing a warrant and an arrest. So you can be more heavy-handed in that circumstance.
All right.
Turning to the next page, previously in the Senate version, there wasn't a policies and procedures requirement. This now says that by November 1st of this year, DOC establishes written policies and procedures for the program to be used by the department, its contractors, and the courts to assist in understanding the program, and that they shall also develop policies and procedures concerning the supervision levels, evidence-based criteria to support those supervision levels, and the means of contact that is appropriate for each supervision level. So really what that contemplates is, I think for lack of a better term, almost creating a rubric, if you will, so that, in these cases, the presumption is that telephone monitoring is appropriate, and this is why. In, other cases, in more enhanced supervision level is appropriate and why. So it's good, they're going to develop those policies and procedures so that the courts have that for their understanding and the department does it for their implementation of the program. And that was something that the court suggested would be helpful for them to, again, I think to expedite this procedure as much as possible.
Okay.
Any questions there?
No.
And then the program is still contingent on funding, but there was an addition that if the program is not operating in a particular county, the courts can't order placement into the program. Because since it's being added as a condition of release, but there's concern about it being able to be implemented statewide right now due to funding constraints, that since this is something that's going to be on the books, it would create sort of this tension of, well, you have judges that may order this condition, but the program isn't operating in their jurisdiction, so it creates this weird disconnect. So this accounts for that.
Ben, could you, I don't want it in the bill, could you do a memo to yourself and me? And I can't think of her name, the head of the committee assistant for justice oversight. I can't think, I've lost her name.
Yeah,
And the memo would be to call in all the players at the November meeting of the Joint Justice Oversight Committee for a review of the progress or lack thereof of S-195. And
well, you'll see later on in the bill that this might get to that, but yes, I can absolutely do that, is that Justice Oversight is actually charged with reviewing the program and making recommendations about the most prudent uses of the funds that are available and where basically the program should start first.
that's fine, but I want to add to that a
Okay.
review of why it isn't everywhere and how, because that's the problem. When you put into the extent the funds are available, you're inviting the administration to not doing something. And we'll still have the same problem because we haven't done anything. And people will say to us, why haven't you done anything? So I do want to put pressure on the administration, and you can send a copy of that to the usual suspects.
I will. Yeah, and that reminds me, I think contextually it's important. So in the budget, there was about $600,000 that was appropriated for this program. That is enough for maybe 2.5 positions, I think it was described to me. So there would be, I think, essentially 2 supervision officers and maybe an administrative support staff. What that looks like, we'll find out over the summer, but there was an attempt, I think, to have justice oversight. I drafted this actually, and it was debated in committee of conference on the budget to then use out-of-state bed savings that have been in the past used to fund justice reinvestment initiatives, to have those savings be directed to supplement the pretrial supervision program upon the recommendations of justice oversight. But unfortunately, that language was struck in the budget. So apparently there are other plans for that money. I think it's just going to revert to the
well,
general fund.
I think it's unfortunate that we do this a lot. We talk a great game about preventing domestic violence and dealing with domestic abusers, and then we don't always fund it properly, and we wonder why things don't change. So anyway, go ahead. I don't know how much time you have left because I really need to get done at 1:15.
Okay, I'll do my best. The next thing, there's program support. They just struck nonprofit from that because nonprofit entities don't do this work. You'll see here that the Senate or that the House version in the next section, section 5. So this is the cleanup of the VCR statute, the criminal contempt. So basically what happened is that that statute 7559 was split into 2, where so it's now 7059 and 7559A. It brings up the contempt requirements and the procedure for that and highlights them and brings them forward in 7559, and then takes sort of the irrelevant sections that are in 7559 now and breaking them out into their own, because A, they're rarely used. It's about really designating court clerk to act in the stead of a judge in certain circumstances, and it's just really not done anymore. So rather than repealing that, because that would have prompted more conversation, they just said, for the time being, we're going to separate those out into a new statute, bring up the things that we're really concerned about with VCRs, highlight them so that prosecutors, judges, and defendants are more aware that this is the procedure. It also works in a small change that I believe Judge Zone highlighted in testimony about the ability sort of over the weekend or during night, if someone comes in, that the court can impose conditions before the arraignment, just if there's essentially the need to do so. So it contemplates that situation as well. And so that really gets us through to a few pages. Yeah, it's So there's now a new section 7, which, because community restitution, which you or work crew, as you know, probably extensively from my colleague Eric Fitzpatrick, was moved into this bill. Basically what it does is that it creates an intent section that DOC reinstitute this program and ensure that it's appropriately staffed and resourced all throughout the state, and that it is added as a sentencing alternative, that in determining a sentence that someone can be placed on a work crew now, pursuant to the policies adopted by DOC, in addition to all the other sentencing alternatives that already exist. You'll also see that the change to the definition of risk of flight was struck from the bill. That was based off of testimony from the courts, the prosecutors, just about let's just leave it as is rather than trying to add new language and new terms that might create some confusion. So that's why it was struck. And then you'll see here, 137030, that's the sentencing alternative statute that added work crew, but it also changed, there was discussion here about having violations of conditions of release to be considered sort of in imposing those sentences. What they did is that they further refined it that any non-compliance with court orders or failures to appear in connection with a criminal prosecution, and you'll see that there's a redundant grammatical change that was addressed as well, that with a criminal prosecution. So there was a concern that, well, if you didn't comply with a child custody order or a child support payment order, can you now then have that used against you in sentencing? And they made the policy choice that no, it had to be related to a criminal prosecution in order for it to be found.
I just want to comment that it's late in the session and everything else, but darn, it ticks me off. We reinstitute work crew, which costs money and positions.
Sorry, Senator Shears, there are bagpipes happening in the State House, and it threw me a little bit.
And
It really helps to be quiet. Sorry.
And we're not funding the pretrial supervisors, which is should be the priority. That really troubles me. So we're going to ask corrections to provide work crew supervisors for people that don't show up for work crew. What am I missing here?
I don't know. I mean, Eric, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know that you handled work crew more than I
Well,
did.
I don't think I need. I don't mean to have a response from Eric or you, Ben.
Yeah.
I just think it's hypocritical. Work crew is part of the problem, not the solution. People don't show up for it, then they get violated. If they had a pretrial supervisor to get them the services they need, they would probably not violate conditions of probation, conditions of release, and would probably have lower recidivism rates and much better outcomes. But instead, we're bowing to this idea that a work crew can work. When I can't remember the statistics from the Department of Corrections, but they were compelling that the program doesn't work and that it should be disbanded. But the House insists on having it. So
I think that what makes this a little different than the past is that it's designed that it's a sentencing alternative that that can be developed solely by the department based on their own policies and procedures. So they essentially have the ability to make it work within their own resources based on the language of that. I don't know if that completely addresses the issue you raised, Senator Sears, but I do know that was part of their testimony, is the way it's drafted here gives them that ability to kind of flex the program.
Well, maybe, but I think we got to get our priorities straight.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Senator Sears.
And that's a policy choice that I will not.
And that's dangerous when you and I agree.
So
it happens more often than not.
I know. I'm joking.
I know you are.
We're in the home stretch, so I'm just going to try and power through. There were no changes to the firearms portion of the bill, so that remains the same as it left the House, or Senate, excuse me. House Corrections did add, that, study that I mentioned before to Justice Oversight about identifying regions to first implement the pretrial supervision program and where to, recommend those funds. So that's something that Justice Oversight does this summer, and will make recommendations, working with DOC, for them to make those recommendations to, Justice Oversight by September 1st, and then submit those by, November 15th to the General Assembly as a whole, based off of, any further conversation that Justice Oversight might have once it's submitted to them. And then, again, coming from House Corrections, the Corrections Monitoring Commission, which was implemented a few years ago, has essentially been non-functioning. It's meant to be a sounding board for the commissioner. It's made up of people that have prior lived experience in the criminal justice system. Actually, I believe at least one of the co-chairs is a former incarcerated individual. But there's an issue because they haven't been meeting, and there's been a lot of sort of infighting from what I understand. And so this is essentially a self-examination that they've been ordered to do about what they need, any training, any resources. And that's a report that'll go to this committee in House Corrections at the beginning of the next session. And then finally, there's a prospective repeal of the pretrial supervision program of December 31st of 2026. So essentially 2 years of operation to see how it goes, and then potentially revisit going into 2027.
I don't agree with that.
I don't either. Because my understanding is we're not fully implementing it. We're not fully funding it. We're going to regionalize it, which creates geographic injustice. So we're basically setting up a tiny portion of the system that's not really funded, and then saying in 2 years, we're going to get rid of it altogether if it doesn't work. And frankly, if we're not funding it and doing it right, I can tell you right now, it's not really going to work.
So have they sent this to us yet? The bill?
Well, no, because this hasn't even been on the floor of the Senate. Well, so yes, this was passed out of the House, but the next step
We'll
is
prepare a concur with further proposal of amendment to make that date 2030.
okay.
Is there anything else we're gonna want to disagree with, or just let it go with that?
Well, you had mentioned the work crew issue.
Well, I don't want to get into that debate with them over that. I don't want to kill the bill.
And then the other issue from, well, I think the first time we started to walk through is the difference in the $200 cap for expungible misdemeanors. The difference between what was passed out of this chamber and there is that essentially the person actually has to be fleeing prosecution, like actively fleeing, in order for the $200 cap to be lifted. That's how it left the House, but that's a policy choice. But
Well, I'll go back to the Senate language, if that's okay with the committee.
I mean, my preference has always been that we don't eliminate the $200 cap ever. So, I mean, I will lose this, I know, but I certainly prefer the House version. But I think we should keep the $200 cap. Because if someone is actively fleeing, we can just hold them without bail.
I'll vote on the Senate version.
I don't think you can hold someone without bail
If they're fleeing.
if they're fleeing. That's just for,
Oh, right, you're right, you're right.
Yeah, that's
Give them
only
bail.
for life imprisonment.
My
or
brain's a
violent
little
felony.
mushy after this week.
Why would that?
I
Aren't we
don't
all?
know, it's hard to know.
So yeah, the way that the Senate had it is that basically it wouldn't apply if they were out on conditions and commit another offense.
fine with that.
I'm not, but.
Okay.
Yeah, because the policy consideration is that lifting the cap on bail once they're actively fleeing. The conversation is that, well, that's an attempt to bring them back. Maybe it will, but that's a policy decision.
Okay, so Ben, if you would prepare that and to take up to the Senate office. And I don't know how to deal with it. It's concur with further proposal of amendment. And
Yes.
just those two proposals. If
Okay.
Nada could sign off for me,
If I can what?
sign
Sign
off
off?
my name,
Oh.
I'll
Oh, yeah,
report
yeah.
it, but
Sure,
I'm not there to give them the bill.
understood.
Yeah, I'll get going on that right away.
Okay. Great. Is there anything else, committee?
Just a very quick question. Just want to confirm, do I have to bring anything for 259 up to the clerk's?
No,
Or-
no, because we're just concurring with the House.
Okay. Just want to double check.
You may want to let Bloomer know we're just going to concur and there's no amendments from us.
Okay.
But other than that, no, you don't have to. I mean, you have to get up and explain why we're concurring.
Just want to make sure.
Just suggest they did minimal damage.
Okay, thank you, Senator Sears.
All right. I think we're adjourned and perhaps for the year, but I can't express my gratitude to all the staff, including Ben Dorbach, Ben Novogowski, Eric Fitzpatrick, and Michelle Childs for all their hard work, and to the members of the committee for a great 2 years. We've done an awful lot of good things, and I feel very proud of this committee. And as I told you last year, I was really worried about the committee when we started January of 2023. But we've worked well together. We've had little disagreements, but we've always been family, and I feel that way about all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Sears.
Thank you.